Before we get started, I just have to take a minute to thank each one of my generous patrons for your part in keeping this podcast going. I could not continue to do it without you, so thank you so much. If you're not a patron yet, but you love the show and you listen regularly, please consider becoming a patron. It's really easy to do and it doesn't have to break the bank. Just head over to theundrapedartist.com and click on the link Be My Patron on Podbean. And then choose a monthly donation amount that fits your budget. It's that simple. And to thank you for your generous donations, once you've reached $100 in total contributions, send me an email to theundrapedartist@gmail.com and I will send you one of our spectacular Undraped Artist aprons. Thank you again for your support. Thank you for watching and listening. Hope you enjoy the episode. Carl Dobsky, welcome to the Undraped Artist Podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's good to meet you.
You too.
Man, so I'm really looking forward to this because I've been following you for a long time and your work is extraordinary. And
Thank you.
Not just extraordinary, but more complex than most work you see out there.
Well, I don't know about that. But
Well, no, I mean, well, I think so. So I'm excited to pick your brain about that. But well, tell me a little bit about how you got into art. What's your background?
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, like all kids, you draw, you paint, and my grandmother also drew and paint. So I would, I'd hang out at grandma's house. I used to live with my grandma for a while too. So I would have access to all her art supplies, and she had those little how-to books that you get.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like how to draw. And I remember things, I love stuff like that. So, I mean, it's always kind of been around, at least through my grandmother. But in terms of taking it seriously, like dedicating myself to it,
Yeah.
like I'm sort of late to the game. I took art classes through high school and stuff like that. But when I first was thinking about going to school for art was not necessarily my first, it wasn't really my original plan.
Really?
And yeah, I wasn't really, like all kids, and you come out of high school and you got to pick a career. You don't really know what to do. There's like that adjustment period.
Right.
And I had thought that maybe I might go to school for psychology, to be like some kind of a psychologist or something like that. And then because the classes are just so fascinating. But then when I had a conversation with a friend, honestly, and I remember telling him my plan, and he was like, "Oh, that's exactly what the world needs, is another psychologist," right? And I was sort of like, "Okay, you're kind of being a jerk," but I mean, in some ways, I get your point. And then I also started to think about actually having to help people with their problems, and I just couldn't handle it. So I knew it wasn't for me. It wasn't for me, and I was like, I'm interested in it, but I don't have what it takes to kind of.
Yeah. Yeah. You just want to listen, but you don't want to have to deal with it. Right.
Yeah, I don't want to have to solve the problem,
Yeah. No kidding.
At least not for somebody else. And so then it was kind of like I didn't know what to do. And I mean, I always enjoyed drawing and painting, and I also had to work, crappy jobs and all of that. I don't come from a wealthy family, so I've always had to work, even through high school, through college, all that. And so I knew what it was like to have, a dead end job and all of that. Right. And I just knew that whatever I did, I wanted to pick a career that I felt kind of enriched me as a person, rather than you just, what I mean, go through the drudgery of it simply for survival. And, I was like, well, art's great for that. Art is like, you really get to push yourself and you get to kind of explore your own thoughts. And so I eventually was just like, well, I'm going to try to do that. You know what I mean?
What do you mean eventually? How long after school? Or was it while you were still in school?
It took a number of years. It took a number of years.
Really?
Yeah, maybe like 3 years or so. I took some classes in university right after high school, but then I stopped going, and I stopped going because, like I said, I don't come from a wealthy background, so I was paying for it.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to just sit there and throw money out the window for things that I wasn't, that weren't going to be, that wasn't going to anything,
Right.
And so I
Right.
stopped taking the classes because I just didn't know what to do, right?
Yeah.
And so it took me a while to kind of redirect myself and realize that I was committed to pursuing a path in art. I mean, to be honest, at the same time, I was still taking like life drawing classes and stuff like that. And you know what I mean? I would always take art classes just because I loved them so much.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
yeah. Anyway, I don't know if that.
Oh yeah, yeah, that helps a lot. But so, okay, so you didn't finish school. You eventually decided you wanted to focus on art. How did you do that? I mean, what was that path like?
So there was a I lived in Tempe, Arizona,
Hmm.
which was part of the greater Phoenix area for people who don't know where Tempe is. And and right across the way is Mesa, Arizona, and there's a big community college there, Mesa Community College. And and there was a guy there named Jim Garrison who, who taught these life drawing classes, and they were fantastic because it was a you know how it is when you take art classes, you take a lot of art classes and the instructor sort of just like encourages you to express yourself and you kind of do whatever
Yeah.
you want, really.
Yeah. Oh, believe
Right.
me.
Well,
Yeah,
he
I know.
didn't do that. He actually offered like some serious, information and like to how to approach drawing the figure. And then of course, the history of that connected to, the Baroque and the Renaissance and all of that. And so his classes were just phenomenal for me. I loved them. So when I finally decided to refocus, I went back and took classes from him simply because I didn't really know where to go. And I was like, well, but there's this guy and he's really good and I'm getting something out of it, And so and so I took classes there until I figured out like, okay, I'll go to art school. I'll do, you know what I mean? And then I transferred out of there and I went to the Ringling School of Art and Design in Sarasota, Florida. And
Oh.
I didn't go for fine art. I actually went for illustration. And my reasoning had been at the time, this was sort of the benefit of taking so long to figure it out, was I knew my decisions were pretty focused. And I took the illustration classes not because I wanted to do illustration, but because I knew that they would let me take life drawing and life painting, and I wouldn't be dissuaded from doing that. You know what I mean? I wouldn't be encouraged to like start incorporating collage or something like that. Like I could
Right,
just focus
right.
on
Oh,
that.
you're not the
So
first one to do that. I mean,
yeah,
there's a
exactly.
couple
So
schools here where everyone that wants to be a fine artist majors in illustration. It's just
oh
like,
really? Yeah.
well, let me put it
Yeah,
this way. Everyone who becomes a fine artist was an illustration major.
well, it actually, you learn a lot of great stuff doing that. So,
Yeah.
so I did that, and then from there, I decided that my skills weren't what I wanted them to be, and that kind of freak out you have when you're graduating college and you're like, oh my God, I gotta go. And for me, like the real world wasn't like a mysterious thing. I knew what was waiting in the real world.
Hmm.
And so I was like, okay, I don't want to go back to that, but I need more time. And so I didn't really honestly know where to go. Uh but the New York Academy of Art had a pretty, good program, as what it looked like at any rate. And I knew I would be in New York City, and then I would, there's lots of artists in New York City, so who knows, right? This is before the internet too, so you couldn't really just send people emails. Like you had to somehow find them
Right.
in IRL, right? And so I went to the New York Academy of Art and got my master's degree in painting. And while I was there, I met various people, and the whole like little atelier thing was starting to kick off. And then I had heard of this little atelier called Water Street Atelier over in Brooklyn that was run by Jacob Collins. And I mean, one look at that, I remember walking in there, and one look at that, I was like, oh my God, I've got to learn how to do this,
No,
so
I had no idea you were a Water Street student. How about that?
yeah, I don't know if I'm like, I wouldn't consider myself like the first wave, but I'm early on. There was only like 15 of us in this warehouse in Dumbo in Brooklyn, you know. And so I did that, but I also would take classes at the Art Students League, and I was taking classes at the New York Academy of Art and stuff like that. So I felt like New York gave me a real, I mean, in terms of art education, it just, like, gave me exposure to a lot of people and a lot of ideas and a real vibrant scene of sort of representational artists doing all various kinds of things, everything from sort of a very classically minded thing like what Jacob Collins was doing to something more narratively driven like Vincent Desiderio, you know, to even, you know, guys like Stephen Assail, who I weirdly had a dream about last night. That was really weird.
You did? No kidding.
Yeah, I had this dream that I he had this I had a can I talk about this? This
Sure,
is
I don't
totally
care. Yeah, that'd be great.
I had this really okay, it's stupid. Nobody's gonna care. I had this dream and it was really intensely vivid. And Steven Sale was having this show, and for some reason I couldn't make it. And I had this other occasion I had to go, and I showed up at his house and I was wearing a suit but no tie, and he was already dressed in a suit and a tie, and I was gonna have to give him the Steve, I can't make the show. And he was like, before I could even get out of my mouth, he's like, you need to put a tie on. Here's you can borrow this one. And I'm like, oh my god, how am I going to tell him I can't go to the anyway? It was just really weird. I woke up going like, I don't even know what that was about exactly, other than Steve telling me I needed to wear a tie. So,
Yeah, you need a few more psychology classes to figure that one out.
yeah, right. Anyway, so the New York thing gave me a lot of exposure to various people and doing things, and you know, you get to see lots of galleries and the museums, of course. So
So
yeah.
did you study with Stephen Assail and Vincent Desiderio?
Yeah, I took classes from them. I mean, I wouldn't say like you know, study in the sense that you take classes in a university setting, so you have them twice a week for however many
Right, right.
semester. I mean, it's not like more a more um workshop or atelier type training where you're around the people all the time. You know, that
Right.
not quite like that, but I definitely had classes with Assail and with Desiderio and who else? Like Wade Schumann and John DeMartin and Dan. I mean, all kinds of people. Yeah.
Man, you've had some education between those three schools. That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I feel lucky in that sense. But I also, it was something like I was extremely proactive in trying to, like I said, it took me a long time to figure out what I wanted to do. And so when I went to go do it, I wasn't just sort of, you know, groping around. I mean, I was groping around, but I wasn't. I had some idea of what I was trying to find, you know.
Yeah, but you had said that you didn't stick around the university in the beginning because, you know, you didn't have a lot of cash and it wasn't really working for you. But how did you afford to go to three different fairly expensive schools?
I have student loans, man. You know, the
Really?
great American way. Yeah, student loans. It's
Holy cow.
horrible.
Well,
It's a horrible.
for
I'm a
grants
sharecropper.
for the Grand Central, it's not Grand Central. Water Street Atelier, you couldn't get a student loan.
No, but man, I don't know. I have no idea what they are doing for tuition nowadays. But I
Yeah.
remember, like I said, there was only 15 of us in this little warehouse. Well, actually, it was pretty big space actually. But and the tuition was $300 a month.
Oh, no
I had a
joke.
job. I had a job on top of it. So like, you know, it's like I wasn't rich, but I could afford $300 a month, you
Right.
know.
I didn't realize it was that inexpensive. Wow, man, you were
Yeah,
really
I mean, I have to. If there's anything I can definitely say, I mean, like I said, I don't know much about the Grand Central thing or whatever, but the Water Street back in the day, I mean, I have to take my hat off to, you know, Mr. Collins. I mean, wow, what an opportunity! And he, you know, he
mm,
wasn't a price guy. I mean, he didn't have to do it at such a, you know what I mean? Like, it was
yeah.
really generous. It's extremely generous, I have to say. It's one of those things that's, you know, you'll remember forever, kind of
Yeah,
thing.
I can't imagine 15 students at $300 a month even covered the cost of the warehouse.
It might not have. I don't even know what the rent was. Do you know what I mean? Like, I
Yeah.
have no idea.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, what an opportunity. That's great. So, once you finished your education, yeah, how did you move into actually doing this for a living?
Well, I started. selling like little still lives and cityscapes and stuff like that. And I did okay for a while, and then I didn't do okay, and I needed to get, you know how things go, sales and go up and
Yeah.
down, like the feast and famine kind of thing. And I needed a steady income, and I got from a friend who said they were running this studio out in San Francisco. Um, they did a lot of commercial work for video games and movies and advertising and stuff like that. And they were doing these workshops. I should go to Austin and check it out, see if I liked it. So I did, and I was intrigued. And he was like, "You should come in and work with this." And I said, I don't really, my digital skills aren't up to snuff, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, don't worry about it. Just come out. You'll learn on the job. So I did. And so I went and I worked for a company called Massive Black.
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
They were an outsourcing company. I think they're still around. They're still doing stuff. And it was a great team of people, a great team of artists. So I had to learn how to make stuff up out of my head and get it approved by an art director, all of that kind of a thing. And so I mean, honestly, I don't really enjoy doing that stuff, to be honest, but the people were fantastic. And so it was a real learning experience, a real growing experience. And I'm still really good friends with a lot of them. So, I mean, it was not like that. It was like just friendship wise, I got along with them really, really well. Like
How
this
long
little
were you
pirate
there?
crew, crazy people. How long was I there? I don't know, 6 years. I don't know.
6 years.
I can't remember.
Okay.
Maybe
Okay.
I can't remember. I don't remember what the actual. I mean, I'm really, like I said, I'm bad with scheduling. I'm bad with
Yeah.
dates and stuff.
That's all good. Yeah, I had a
Yeah.
similar experience, but mine only lasted 2 months. I worked for Avalanche Software here in Salt Lake City
Oh, really?
for two
Okay.
months. Yeah, but and
Did you
I
not like it?
no, I felt the same way. It was and I the group was great. I made good friends. They're great people, incredibly talented artists, but it just wasn't for me. I just wanted to paint.
Yeah. So I got lucky on that account too, because I mean that's like so, and I was showing it at the John Pence Gallery at the time. So I was still painting, you know what I mean? I wasn't just doing that. I was also painting and exhibiting it at the John Pence Gallery in San
Is
Francisco.
John Pence around anymore?
No, he retired a number of years
Oh,
ago,
okay.
man. Yeah, what a powerhouse that guy was too,
Yeah, that
like
was a big deal gallery for a while there, but I haven't heard anything lately, so that's why I asked.
no, I mean, I remember it must have been around the 2016 elections. And he elections are apparently, I don't know this, but I've had a couple of gallery dealers tell me that elections times are apparently really hard for sales. Like it's a
Really?
really rough time for galleries because people are like in not really knowing what's going to happen, and they don't really want to spend money. I don't know. That's what I've heard. I don't really know. Okay,
Huh,
but at
yeah.
any rate, I know that he was getting up there in years. I'm sure the gallery was a lot of work. He didn't want to have to deal with all of that, and so he just decided to retire. And I
Mm.
hope I've got that story right. I mean, I hope I'm not just, creating rumors and gossip. I think
No.
that's
Well,
something
if
something
it
like
it's
that.
pretty tame gossip if it's gossip, so I wouldn't worry about
Yeah.
it.
But at any rate, he retired. So
Okay.
that there was nobody to really kind of take over the gallery, or that was willing to step up to take over the gallery. So it's gone now.
Yeah. So where'd you go from there? And what did you do once
Um,
you left the video game industry?
so I was still with those guys, right? I was
Yeah.
doing both at the same, and I I had wanted a bigger studio. Good morning. Sorry about
No,
that.
no worries.
And I had wanted a bigger studio, but the rents in San Francisco were so, I mean, notoriously like ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
That I couldn't really finance a thing all by myself. So I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to teach a couple students privately, right? and that'll finance a bigger studio, right? That's literally what, and I'm just going to do this, right? I was like, I want a bigger studio. I'm just going to do this, right? And so I had started to kind of look for places and kind of figure out like how I might advertise or whatever to, and one of the guys who was like at Massive Black was like, hey, we've been thinking about maybe starting like a little school or something like that, and you seem obviously like you're about to go do something. And so he had this idea, and like he's like, and they wanted it to be centered around like digital illustration, kind of the game industry type stuff, concept art, that kind of stuff. And I was like, well, I don't really know if I'm the guy for that, and he was like, no, you blah, blah, whatever, would be great. And I said, okay, well, what I want out of the deal is I want a big enough space for myself that I can paint in, right? And if I'm gonna teach classes, I want to do it however I want, and nobody gets to tell me how I'm gonna do it. Right? Like, you know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? You basically have to just leave me alone and let me do whatever I want.
Yeah.
And he agreed to it. And he agreed to it. So I started teaching all of these guys that wanted to learn. Most of them wanted to learn how to do. I mean, some of them wanted to do fine art, but most of them wanted to work as concept artists. And I made them all do like traditional cast drawing and stuff like that. And one of the benefits of working with say Jacob Collins was he was so into like conceptualizing volume and how light strikes volumes and stuff like that, and really like kind of imagining it in your head. And so I you you're working from observation, but you need to conceptually understand it, and that way you can apply it to things from your imagination as well, because the
Mm-hmm.
rule works the same way. Now you
Mm-hmm.
have like real solid experiential knowledge of how it really works. Like you have like a control group. You could say like, there's your target. You got to make it look exactly like that thing right there, or at least make me believe that it looks exactly like that thing right there, right? And so it worked great, and they also did classes with the other guys at the studio to help improve them in their like character design and environment design. So we had this sort of weird conglomerate little school, um, that kind of hodgepodge these different things together. And I have to say, it was one of my proudest moments of my life, man. Like we had a small group of people, and I think almost all of them are working in the industry. Like we had a
Wow.
really high success rate.
That's
Yeah, right, an
impressive.
extremely great. So, but then, whatever, things happen and time moves on, and you got to go do whatever else, and it is no more. But it was anyway. That's how I transitioned into teaching, actually, right? And
Right.
then from teaching, it's always been just more doing my own work and teaching than it has been doing concept work or anything like that. So that was
So
sort of where the pivot.
are you teaching now still?
I'm not teaching this semester. I was teaching at uh, Cal State University at Long Beach, and I've been teaching at Laguna College of Art and Design, and sometimes I've done like private figure classes here in LA.
Hmm.
So I've been teaching, but not like I don't have my own studio set up or anything like that.
Right. Okay. So you said things happen. I want to know more about that. So you closed the studio and then you moved to Southern California. I mean, tell me what happens there.
Yeah, yeah. My partner and I have a kid, and so I moved to Southern California for family reasons, essentially,
Okay.
and set up shop down here.
Gotcha. Gotcha. All right. So tell me about your. No, you're not showing at Pence Gallery anymore. So where are you showing and how are you moving work at this point?
Well, right now I'm just selling it through myself, and there's also a gallery at Bergamot Station out in Santa Monica, which is here in LA, a Copro Gallery. Um, I'm moving stuff through there. There's a great group of people over there, and that's it at the moment. I'm doing that and just selling it on my own.
Through social media or word of mouth
Yeah,
or what?
Yeah, exactly. Or email or web people come to the website or whatever. Um,
No
so
kidding.
there's
You're
that.
selling
But
these big complex paintings on social media and through the web.
no. Nobody on social media who's serious comes through social media. No, that would come
Oh,
through like probably an email or something like that. And so honestly, those big paintings they take a long time to sell, man. They do not move quick, you
no, I'm
know.
not
But
surprised. I mean, not
yeah,
because they're
I
not
mean,
worth it, but I know how the multi-figure thing is tricky.
well, I mean, I had that show at Copro with Sean Barber and Coro Kaufman last year, and they sold a number of them. They did really well.
That's
I don't
great.
want to dwell too much on business, but I mean, it was a really great show. And so actually Sean Barber and I are having a show in June at Copro coming up this June. So I'm getting busy on that. And I don't think I will have I don't think I'm going to go whole hog and make a ton of giant work. I think I'm going to do some more mid-size and small stuff. I just recently just finished another big one. So like, I need to recoup
Yeah.
a little bit. Those things take a lot out of me. But yeah, so that big one is actually at a show that's open right now. It's at the Bo Bartlett Center in Columbus, Georgia, and will be up until December.
Oh man, I
And
wish I could see that.
the reception for that is on October 5th.
Okay.
And there's people like Vincent Desiderio and Steve Assail and Paul Feniak and Noah Buchanan and oh my God, who else? Margaret Boland. And I now I've got to remember everybody's names, and I can't remember everybody's names right at the moment because I'm on the spot. But
No, that's
it's
okay.
got quite a number of people in there, and they're all spectacular painters. Um, Bo Bartlett, of course, is in it.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. So that's up. I don't know if you've seen that, but I can't wait. I haven't
No.
seen in person yet. I'll be out there on the 5th. I can't wait to see that show. It looks fantastic.
Dang. Yeah, I wish
I'm
I could
really,
see
really
that in
excited for that.
person. That's some lineup. Holy
Yeah,
moly.
it will. I am told that it will travel to New York. I forget what the date is. I want to say it's in February, but I could be wrong. It could be January. I don't really know. I think February. It'll be in New York, and it will be exhibited. The New York Academy of Art has this really giant space on the first floor. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if you've ever been
I've
there.
never been there, no.
It's on Franklin Street over in Tribeca. Anyway, it'll go there for however long, but it's going to go to New York too. So if you're out on the East Coast up New York ways, it'll be up there in the winter.
Wow. Yeah, that's exciting. Man, what a lineup. I'm gonna
Yeah.
try and see that.
I actually worked with, it was actually Noah Buchanan's idea, really. But Noah and I and Bo Bartlett and the people at the Bo Bartlett Center curated the show. So I actually was involved somewhat in the curating and all of that. You
Hmm.
know, so that was interesting too. I'd
Yeah.
never done that before. I never worked with so many people and trying to get a bunch of artists together in a show and then having to deal with all the logistics and all of the stuff that has to be taken care of behind the scenes, like everything from shipping to legal whatever permissions and
Oh,
all
you
that
had to
kind of
deal with
stuff.
all that business stuff too?
No. I mean, like I said, there's a whole team of people at the Bo Bartlett Center there, and a great team of people, and they they're dealing with most of that. I had to more deal with things like, when you're trying to get the show together, like who you can agree who's going to be in the show, and then getting available pieces. You know what I mean? So you would see like what somebody had available. You're like, oh, I would really like that piece to be in the show. And then, okay, somebody's got to get in touch with the collector or the gallery or whoever happens to have the piece. And so there was just like a lot of back and forth on it. I
Hmm.
wouldn't say like, no, I was not sending emails to places going, could you please lend us whatever? No, that was not, you wouldn't want me to do that anyway.
This episode is brought to you in part by Rosemary Brushes. If you're one of my listeners who's a professional artist, you're already using Rosemary Brushes. But for the rest of you, come on. Take your work a little more seriously. Stop buying the other brands. It's just not worth it. Every now and then you may get lucky and buy a good brush from another brand, but use the brand that professionals like myself are using. Go to rosemaryandco.com, link in the description or the show notes, and get yourself some quality brushes before your next painting. So what was the purpose of the show? Because if you're getting it from collectors, some of them are already sold.
Yeah, so yeah, it's not a commercial show. It's just it's like a museum kind of a show.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just a show for people to go see, and the purpose of the show it's to center around large scale, multi-figure narrative work, right? And and just to get a collection of those kinds of things, and that's really where the impetus of the show comes from, and so everything in the show is going to be fairly large, some kind of narrative thing going on, like that kind of a thing.
Man, how do you deal with all the shipping and whatnot for these large paintings? Are most people unstretching them, rolling them up, or are they coming in giant crates?
I think they're coming in giant crates. I think maybe I don't know, maybe somebody rolled them up, but like they're coming in crates.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah, it's expensive.
that sounds really expensive. Not to mention all the insurance and 'cause some of
Exactly.
these paintings have got to be worth a fortune.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Wow, man.
Well,
Yeah,
but I mean, so we're really fortunate to have all of them in a show. It's like I said, I'm really excited about seeing it. Like I haven't seen it in person yet. I'll see that on October 5th, which is when the reception is. But it's up right now. If somebody's out there wants to go see it, it's up right now. But the reception will be on the 5th. I can't wait to see it. It looks like a phenomenal show.
so where can people see it online, or is there not an online version?
I believe you can just go to the Bo Bartlett Center website. I
Okay.
believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Man, yeah, that might be worth a flight. I might fly out and see it.
I
Sounds
I do
amazing.
know that on the reception on October 5th, quite a few of the artists will be there. So
Really?
that I'm also excited to meet some of them because some of them, I've been looking up at their work for a long, long time, and I just can't wait to be able to, hang out and meet some of
Hmm.
them.
Is it open to the public, the reception, or is it just,
Yes, of course.
it is?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
sounds amazing. Cool. Okay. Well, let's start talking about your work a little bit. So I've got your website pulled up here. And
Oh no, my website's horrible.
okay, that's what every artist says. Do you want to go to Instagram instead? Should we go to Instagram
No,
and
I
look
don't
through
really
there?
care. I don't really care how you want to do it.
Okay, okay. All right. So, your work, like I said in the beginning, is so complex. And I'm also a multi-figure painter, but your stuff makes mine look simple. I mean, it's the
That's
amount
not
of
true, man. You do some pretty
I
complicated stuff in like all of the diorama things and everything. I mean, come
oh, well,
on.
thanks,
That's
man. I appreciate
that's not
that.
true.
I appreciate that, but I really want to know how you put these together because and I have to say this. I said to one of my other guests, Sean Lay from Australia, I had said to him that he was the most underrated painter on Instagram. And, but it was because mostly because he's new to Instagram. But dude, I look at your page and you've got a reasonable amount of followers, but that Instagram just drives me up a wall because your stuff is so complex and sophisticated. But all the algorithm wants to see is close-ups of eyes and portrait
That's
demonstrations.
that's exactly right.
And I was just like, freaking, it just makes me so frustrated
Oh,
that
me,
you've
well,
got
me
this
too. I mean, I look at
complex work that just people skim right over it because it's not a detail of a tear duct.
sure, and when it's that small, it doesn't have that kind of impact. I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
I mean, it really is that way because there are some people, phenomenal artists who have work in museums and stuff, and you look at how many followers they have, and it's like almost not like, you know what I mean? It certainly isn't 250,000 or something like that, right?
No,
But
no.
it's exactly as you say. It's just the way the algorithm is, and the kind of click habits of people themselves. I mean, but anyway, even if it was 250,000 followers, let's say, like, does that mean you really have that many people that are really into what you do? I don't really think that's a direct translation, you know? I think a
No,
lot of people,
probably not.
yeah, because for their, I mean, they're looking at this stuff for their in their own motivated way, and the algorithm rewards that, and there you have it, you know? And but I don't worry about stuff like that. Like, who cares? It's just social media. You know what I mean? It's a tool that can be used, and I don't really think it's a measure of anybody's worth or success or any other such thing. So
No, I
I
agree with you. I agree with you 100%, which is why I frankly, I care less about my following. It frustrates me when I see other people have a smaller following because I think, what the heck? Why isn't the world seeing this stuff? That's why it frustrates me. So yeah, I get it. It doesn't affect my career at all. How many followers I
exactly,
have at all. It
exactly,
doesn't affect
exactly.
your career at all. It's not a big deal. We get that it's kind of a faux success, but the reason I find it frustrating is because I follow you and I'm just like, more people need to look closer at this.
Well, thank you.
It's not something that you should just pan over because it's not close enough to the face, or because you
Sure,
haven't done 1,000 reels last week. Um,
exactly.
and it's
Yeah,
yeah, and so that's my soapbox. I just had to tell you that. I mean, it's just your work is off the charts. But
thank you.
one of the things I wanted to we're going to talk. I want to talk about technique and your process first, or not
Okay.
first, but eventually. But you have a narrative quality about your work that suggests that there's a lot of meaning that we could only speculate about. It feels very personal. It feels like you're trying to say something or you are saying something, but I don't always know what you're saying. Where are you getting these ideas from?
Well, I mean, I mean, that's a hard question. Where does any of that stuff come from? You know, it's like from all over the place.
Right.
Um, I, I mean, I read a lot. I've over the years just become like junky with books, and and I also, I research stuff and whatever. So there's a lot of that, and but more than just that, like if I read something or if I see something somewhere, if I see somebody else's artwork, I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. Or I just hear something in conversation or something just strikes me out of the blue. I have I keep notes and I just write down anything and everything that somehow gets me going, and it could be something um fairly lucid or it could be something completely random, like,
Yeah.
and I just keep this sort of
Hmm.
list going, and then as I go through my day I think about stuff and I just find that my thoughts kind of center around certain ideas, and then I start to um kind of go back through my lists and I try to see, like, well, is there some sort of thread in here? Like, can I piece things together? Or are there things that kind of go together? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Oh wow, they're connected in some strange way, or something like that. So I use the list to kind of inform. Once I kind of have realized that my thoughts are centering around a certain idea, then I kind of go through the list to try to go, like, well, how could you flesh this idea out? And then eventually, I start doing little sketches and stuff like that out of my head, and I just make stuff up out of my head to try to figure out, like, how could you conceive of this idea in such and such a way? Does it work like that? Would it be better another way? So that's how they're generated. That's kind of I guess my process now is
Okay.
I don't
So,
I don't want to make it sound like I'm a big writer. I'm not. I don't really write a lot or anything like that. It's literally like a list that
right.
has like a sentence or sometimes even just a phrase, you know what I mean? And
Hmm.
it's just like a list of stuff. It's not even like this is about whatever. I just write down little blurbs and sometimes I even forget why I wrote it down. you know?
Hmm.
But but that's where a lot of it a lot of it comes from, you know. So I would say, let me give you a more focused answer. I feel like I will ramble a lot if you let me. Um,
No,
I,
you're doing
I
great.
feel like I feel like I have certain like, for instance, one of my hobbies is to read political philosophy. I know it's a really boring hobby, but I read a lot about stuff like that, you know. Um, so for instance, lately, I've been reading a lot about like the French Revolution and stuff like that, and my reason for reading the French Revolution is not just simply just the history of it, but also because that's where you have these sort of Enlightenment ideas about natural rights, you know, egalite, liberté, all that kind of stuff, fraternité, all playing out in real in time. And so we know that things like the French Revolution, or even the American Revolution for that matter, we know that certain thinkers had direct influence on that, right? Like, for
Mm-hmm.
instance,
Mm-hmm.
like Rousseau and Diderot, they're buried in the Pantheon in Paris, right? Uh, Voltaire is also, wait, is Diderot buried there? Voltaire and Rousseau are for sure, I know that. Um, so like these thinkers had huge influence, so that's like a thing I like to read about stuff like that, and it's impossible to not have thoughts enter your head about them, because it's not like this thing, for me at least, it's not this thing that's in the remote past. It's still very much affecting us today. Do you know what I mean? And so for me, these ideas are not some dead thing in a book. I look around and I see it still playing out in front of me, and so a lot of my ideas can kind of spring off of thoughts and reflections in that manner, right?
Hmm.
Or if it's of something more personal, you know, like I know that Freud is a real controversial figure, and rightly so, but he wrote some really interesting stuff, like, you know, Civilization and Its Discontents is an extremely interesting book. And so, you know, I mean, so things could come from that direction or that venue or whatever, but they also, like I said, it also comes from, like, you know, looking at art. Like, I like to go to shows and I like to see what other people are doing, um, et cetera, et cetera. So the
Hmm.
ideas could come from anywhere, you know, literally. It could just strike me out of the blue while I'm walking down the street too, like from anywhere, you know.
Are they
I guess
always?
I guess in some ways I'm always trying to be attentive to my response and my feelings about things that I'm encountering. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm trying to prime the charge a little bit, in the sense where, like, I don't just like randomly walk around my neighborhood, because I mean my neighborhood might be interesting, but I'm not really sure it's the most fascinating place in the world, you know? So I like to prime the charge by taking in input from, you know, museum shows and books and stuff like that. So I'm trying to expose myself to a lot of ideas and a lot of different thoughts in order to help me, to sort of like spur me on to think about stuff. And then that's where a lot of the ideas kind of come from.
You know what's so interesting about listening to you is I just interviewed a couple people. I don't know if you've heard the podcast at all, but
I haven't.
I interviewed Peter Van Dyke recently, who literally
Okay.
just walks around his neighborhood and paints it. I mean,
Uh-huh.
or even sometimes doesn't even get out of his bathroom. His paintings are extraordinary, right? They're so incredible.
Yeah, he's
And
excellent. I really like his work, by the way. I
yeah,
really.
but it's interesting that it's interesting the diversity among artists. It's like that's not something that interests you though. You need to do something else. And then I recently interviewed Daniela Stone. She's an Italian artist,
Uh-huh.
and she starts with no idea and something completely without void of meaning, and just starts creating an image, and then inserts meaning as she goes. And it's just fascinating how there's so many different ways to come up with an
Oh,
image.
sure.
It's crazy to hear it.
Well, it'd be a boring world if everybody did things exactly the
I
same way.
know, I know. I understand that, but it still surprises me just how different people are. Where one person can say, "Oh, my neighborhood is boring," another person could make a career on it. You know,
Sure.
it's
Well, I,
it's
I guess
mind
I
blowing.
guess I maybe I want to talk about that. I actually don't think my neighborhood is boring, nor do I think that walking around that. I mean, if we wanted to take, you know, Voltaire's advice to heart that we should all tend our gardens, his famous quote, then of course walking around your neighborhood should be one of the most profound things. It should be part where like, you love the place you live and you respond to it in some way, in a deep way. That's a cool thing. That's a really, really cool thing. Um, to have a sort of, I don't want to necessarily call it a documentation, but I don't know what I would call it exactly. An expression of that, uh, bearing witness to it, maybe. I don't really know what I would call it, but I think that's a really, really cool thing. I just at some point realized that I'm just not that guy.
Well,
I
that's,
mean,
and that's my
I
point.
am.
Yeah. And that's my
I
point.
am I am that guy. I am that guy in the sense that I do that. I walk around my neighborhood and I, like see stuff, cool stuff and interactions with people and all of these things. And I think that that's great. I just think that for me, over the years, and I didn't start this way, but I think over the years, for me, art has become more about, I feel like it's more of like a public, I don't want to say, I guess a public discourse, or it's like I realize that I'm speaking with somebody else and I'm speaking with them publicly, right? It's
Right.
not such a private thing. And so I have drifted more into ideas of narrative and working and things like that, and thinking about ideas that um, maybe we kind of all share, we all intersect with or come to terms with at some point in time. And so that has been sort of my impetus to kind of work more in a way where I'm going like, wow, I would like to make something about this because this is an issue that sort of touches not just my life, but other people's lives as well, right? And how
Mm-hmm.
can I say that in a hopefully compelling way, or at the very least, not in a boring way.
Yeah.
And that's I think where my head has been at. It's not so much like that I think that people shouldn't just go around their neighborhood or that people should only tell these grand giant narratives or not tell deeply personal things. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with like my actual feeling of like I'm like, hey, I art has the ability to do all kinds of amazing things, and one of them is that it can sort of speak to a the thoughts and feelings of not just an individual but of groups, and I find that really compelling. And that
Right.
was what made me kind of want to do it. And if I have to put a personal spin on it, because I think that if you get too giant and abstract and don't have any sort of if it has the danger of becoming completely detached from your own experiences and world, and I don't think that's a good thing. I think all of this started to really happen for me when my daughter was born, and I realized I was going to have to explain the world to another person, and it kind of really made me, take things into consideration that, if you don't have kids, it's easy to overlook, you know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
kind of, I think that was a big, really spurred me on to thinking that way.
Yeah.
Uh,
I understood what you were saying. It's not about what's the right way to paint. It's that we're all unique individuals that are turned on by different aspects of the creative process. And and
Sure,
and
absolutely.
oftentimes we're more interested in looking at other people's way of making paintings while we still keep
Absolutely.
doing what we're doing. That's how I feel
Yes.
anyway. I'm like, man, what he's doing is really cool, but that's just not the way I'm wired, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. And I
yeah.
think that's like I think that's great because otherwise, like if everybody did the same thing, what a boring world, right?
Yeah, it
So
would be for sure. Well, let's talk about this painting right here.
so which image?
So this one here, let me maybe to help us understand a little bit better your creative process. Maybe we can just talk about one image. What
Okay.
tell me about how this one came about and a little bit about its meaning.
The one in the middle,
Yeah, the
with the
one in the
two
middle.
guys.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So it's the argument between the blind man and the lame man is I believe that's what the title of it is.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a there's an idea, sort of a an idea that, so this is where the idea came from. Wow, am I going to take all the mystery out of it by explaining exactly where I
Well,
got
do
the?
whatever you're comfortable with. I mean, I'd like to know, and I'm sure the audience would like to know kind of how you tick. But I mean, if you're not
Okay, so
comfortable
here's
sharing
how I
everything,
came at
that's
it.
fine.
This is going to sound really pretentious for a second, and so
Okay.
I pardon. I'll try to just make it brief. There's an idea in sort of idea of like how consciousness arrives or arises, not arrives, but arises, or
Mm-hmm.
and even in it comes from Hegel, and it's called the master slave dialectic. Okay, and it's almost this idea that inside of us, or not just inside of us, but also socially as well, that we come to sort of self-awareness through a kind of conflict. Okay, and you could say this, you find this in Freud, and so we first become to know ourselves after we can identify an other. Okay, that's
Right.
sort of where the idea comes from, but it's not in this sort of like kumbaya peaceful way. There's a sort of conflict involved. Okay, and so that's where I was like, wow, that would be a really cool subject. But like, how do I show that? I have no idea. It's so abstract and so out there, and that's boring. I don't, who wants to sit there and listen to somebody talk about Hegel? Like that's, I mean, you know what I mean? Ugh,
Yeah.
who wants to do something like that? So how do I embody that in something? And I thought of, well, what if you know, there was this argument between them, and I just started doing these sketches, and like little thumbnail sketches, trying to figure out like how would you have these two people relating to one another. And I basically followed that thread, and I kept doing some research, and I came across a story, all right, an old story, and there are various versions of this. So what the one I'm giving is not a definitive version, but let's just say it's a version, and if you want to, you can find other versions of the story. There's a story about, I think it's an old Jewish story, and it's about, there's a garden, and it has these fruit trees, right? And in some versions, it's like the gardener or the Lord or whoever, or even God. In some versions, it's God, even though they don't know it's God at the moment. Like tells them, "Hey, I need somebody to sort of to watch the garden. Will you guys watch the make sure nobody steals the fruit, right?" And so the gardener, God, whoever goes away, and the blind man and the lame man figured, hey, you know what? They're beggars, so they were like, what if we got some of this fruit for ourselves, right? And the blind, and they suggest, well, the lame man says, I can't walk, so you could put me on your shoulders and I could guide you over to where the trees are, and that way we can work together in order to accomplish this task, right? Um, and then of course they get busted and they blame it on each other. It was his fault. It was his fault, right? So it's like not. It's this really weird little story, and I thought that's awfully kind of similar in a weird way. Like you're the to go back to like the other. It's like or the relationship between people. It's a symbiotic relationship, but it's not necessarily like a kumbaya symbiotic relationship, right? It's something a little bit more dark, a little more self-centered. There's also a poem written by Keats, I believe, that has to do with the same story. So you'll find it in various versions, right? And so from that, I was like, oh, that's perfect. I like that. I like the fact that both of them are handicapped in some way and need one another. And now my idea is like how to express that in terms of an argument. Okay. And so that was where the idea took kind of visual form, where I was like, okay, this has got like a visual form to it now, where you don't have to know all the book stuff. The visual itself makes sense in some way, or at least it has a dynamic that somebody can get into, right? And then from there, I started to kind of fleshed it out. And then it was more about like, how do I make the gestures and the composition start to embody that idea and bring that out? Like, for instance, the weight of the guy on his back, like the guy is leaning impossibly forward. You know what I mean? Like there's no way. So I went through a number of versions where I was like, no, I like the impossibleness of it. It gives it like a force that it wouldn't have if it was done naturalistically, right? So that's kind of how I arrived at that image.
Oh, no, you didn't ruin it, man. You made it better. That's freaking cool. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't
And I
understand
even
it.
remember like say like the sorry to cut you off. The roots in the background. Can you see
Yeah.
like the roots?
Yeah.
So I
Absolutely.
remember at one point I had them in some thumbnail sketch, I had them like they were going to be on a hill and you could see like maybe a little bit of the garden and whatever. And I felt like that was just so stereotypical, like, oh, you can see the city in the background, that kind of a thing, right? Like, and I was like, I need something darker, something else. And just to go back to walking around your neighborhood, I live over by Griffith Park in Los Angeles, and there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of these hill trails where there will be like these trees on the sides of the hills with the roots. And I was hiking up to the Griffith Observatory, and there was like a tree like with these roots, and I was like, there's something that I felt was almost primal about roots rather than, you know what I mean? I thought like maybe I'll even try to like kind of embed this primitive or very natural thing in a darker way. Like roots have a different connotation than a city, right? So
Yeah.
I felt like I would try to support it with the various elements were chosen to kind of like maybe help invoke the sort of primalness of the problem, like that's kind of what I was thinking, or at least that's what I was thinking. Not that I expect anybody to ever realize that when they look at it, but that's why I chose like roots versus sky. And I did get the idea walking around my neighborhood for that actually. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So you're the hybrid painter that day. Yeah, yeah, I don't know what it is about roots. If you do a garden, the roots are just the bottom half of the garden. But I
Yeah.
guess what it is they're underground. They're in the dirt. They're below the earth. It just is more of
Right.
a dark, more of an uncomfortable feeling about roots. I think that was a great decision. Yeah, your process is so poetic. I mean, you really seem
Thank
to put a
you.
lot of thought into it. Obviously, put a lot of thought into it. I just want to talk about a couple more because I'm really interested in these stories. How about this guy? These two guys. What is
Okay,
this one about?
so this one is called Grave Diggers. um This is going to be the obscure one. So if anybody's going to think that all I ever do is sit there and read these giant things and like construct my ideas, like it doesn't always happen that way. So this one is going to happen in a randomly different way. Okay.
Okay.
Um, so I told you I keep a running list of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
I just jot things down that attract me for some reason. I wrote down the phrase grave diggers, and that's all it said. It just said grave diggers.
What?
And I
Why?
had written it down however long ago. I couldn't
You
even
see it in a
remember.
book or something, or it just
Yeah,
came to your head?
that's exactly my point. Like I can't remember where it came from or why I wrote it down. Uh, on some level, I thought maybe it had something to do with like there's a point in Thus Spoke Zarathustra by Nietzsche, where Zarathustra carries this dead man around and puts him in the hollow of a tree. The grave there's grave diggers, and maybe there was a quote in there that had something to do with grave diggers. I don't really remember. I suspect maybe it had something to do with that, but I'm not entirely certain. And it doesn't. At any rate, the image that comes out of it has nothing to do with that. I know that. So like I don't really know where the initial impetus came from. It was just
Mm-hmm.
something I wrote down, and there it was on my little list. And one day I was just going back through my list, and this image just came to my head when I saw the phrase. And I was like, oh
Really?
man, yeah. And I was like,
What?
it's like, and I
You
was like,
really
it's
should have
just like,
stuck with that psychology
oh,
degree.
I was like, it's like a race to the bottom. And like how do you show this race to the bottom, and so that's kind of what I had going on in my head was it's it's like a race, and I had originally tried to tried to show, like, I had these sketches where I had imagined that somehow the shovels and the the graves would somehow be like almost if they were having like a rowing race and the shovels were like
Oh, I
rowing.
was going to ask
But
why they're
it didn't.
sitting.
Yeah, but exactly. But it didn't really work from the angle I had. So I changed the angle to a more above angle looking down in. And 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 not like I wasn't
So,
really attached to the boat thing anyway, but it was more like a competition of some kind, right?
okay, so I'm sorry to cut you off, but that's what fascinates me about your mind. Why isn't just digging a good enough competition? Why does it have to be a sport of some kind in order to make your point? Because you could easily just have two guys looking at each other in such a way that they clearly are trying to race to the bottom in a digging competition. But you went above and beyond and added this symbolism of competition through a boat race. I mean, maybe you could
Yeah,
tell me a little bit
not
about
that I
that.
think anybody's not that I think anybody's really going to ever get that from it. Do you know what I mean? I'm just telling you,
No, I know,
like it
but
was just
tell me about tell, I don't, maybe there's nothing to say about it, but I guess the reason I'm asking is that I could see myself saying, yeah, this painting is about a race to the bottom. It's about a competition of who can dig the deepest, the fastest, and just literally illustrating that thing. Whereas you went above and beyond that and added symbolism by making it look like two guys in two boats in a race, and yet they're digging.
and
And
yet
I
they're
find
digging.
that really interesting and sophisticated because you're not going for the obvious. The obvious is just illustrate two guys racing to see who can dig
Sure.
faster, right?
Yeah, but isn't that what it is to be a storyteller? Like you're not
Yeah,
you're supposed to you're supposed to keep the audience entertained as well in some respect, right? And if all you do is use cliche after cliche, like how interesting is that? That makes you a bad storyteller. I actually don't
right.
think
You're
that
right.
I actually don't think that really thinking about what you're saying or trying to be articulate drains the mystery out of things. I don't think that does at all. I think being a bad storyteller drains the mystery out of things. You know,
Oh, yeah.
it's not being overly intellectual that's the problem. It's being a bad storyteller. That's what the problem is, you know? So, I
Hmm.
mean, that's my opinion, and I don't think everybody's going to agree with that, but that's kind of how I feel about that. Um, so
Hmm.
anyway, I think part of it just comes from like, how do you tell a story? And why I chose that, man, I don't really know. You know what I mean? It's like, it came to me and like I said, and I do a lot of sketching, right? So they're horrible sketches, by the way. I would never show them to anybody, but they're enough for me to like start to visualize what I'm talking about. So I don't just have an idea and then I draw it out and that's the end of it. It's like for me, like I'm like going through revisions and drafts and like, is this pose better than this? What if it was like this? Because, all of this stuff says something. Like the pose itself says something, like a certain pose, body language says something. A certain pose says something that another pose does not say, right? And how do you combine all of that into making an image that has intention but also isn't can be surprising in some way, which is part of a good story. There's got to be surprises in it. There's got to be plot twists and surprises. Otherwise,
Yeah, that's what's so
stories.
interesting about it. It's surprising. Two guys sitting in, I didn't see the boats, but they're sitting,
Well,
and
you're
I'm
not.
like, why are they
I don't really
sitting?
think. Yeah, and I have no intention or expectation that anybody would ever think of that. That's just how I arrived. That's literally how I arrived at it. You know what I mean? And I just liked it, and I liked the
Yeah,
fact that the shovels were up. The shovels were almost made them more threatening each other. It focused on the threatening each other rather than the digging. The digging is already obvious enough,
right.
like I don't need to say digging, 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 digging. I could say digging, but then there's this other thing going on.
And digging
And then
almost becomes secondary. It's more
yeah,
about the
and it's
relationship between the two characters.
exactly. The digging is already understood. There's no reason to dwell on it. You know what I mean? It's already understood. You don't need to keep talking about it. Everybody already knows digging is going
That's
on.
really
Right?
smart. That,
So,
yeah.
and then of course, I chose like the desert. Like I had the desert plants. I wanted the spiky, thorny plants everywhere rather than anything lush or green. I specifically picked desert plants to make spiky, thorny things. Um, I had at one point had a thumbnail sketch where you could see like as if they had driven out there in an old station wagon, like you could see the tire from the car, which I eventually eliminated
Hmm.
from the. I mean, I never it never got painted into this actual painting, but like there were compositions where there was a like you could see part of the car where they had arrived there, and I felt like that was superfluous. Who cares how they got there? You know what I mean? Like, so I edited out stuff, and then I even like the last thing from just a technical standpoint was that bit of cloth that's added in there. I added that in at the very end because it just needed something to kind of break up the symmetry. And so I just went for a total form. I'm like, hey man, this whole cloth idea has worked since the Renaissance. And I struggled with it because I was like, yeah, but why is the cloth in there? Why? And I eventually went like, who cares?
I've been doing Jeff's online mentorship program for about a year now, and it is awesome. Everything is online, super streamlined. If you can be there, I mean, you have the ability to talk to him once a week and he can review your work and help you. If you can't be there, it's pre-recorded. You can go back and even re-watch things if you missed something during class or couldn't be there. So the online portion of it is almost better than real life because you can always go back to it, which is awesome. The demos are recorded. It's just like all available whenever you need it. And I'm a stay-at-home mom of 4 and my time is limited and it's also very interrupted. And so to be able to go back has been clutch for me. And you get to work with Jeff Hein, who's awesome. He's tough. The assignments are simple, but difficult, and they're difficult to make us all better. And he's able to give us these assignments, coach us through it, help us stay excited to progress. And so it's just been a great experience. I am so grateful that he has been willing to take time away from his own art to offer all of us to have it. So if you're thinking about doing it, it's amazing.
To learn more about how you could have me as a personal mentor, check out the link to HeinAtelier.com in the show notes or video description. So everything you're saying brings a question to mind. As a fellow multi-figure painter, I often struggle with how to balance designing the composition with designing the narrative or the story. So when I start laying out the figures, it's difficult to know whether I should focus on the story first and lay out the figures in such a way that they interact in a way that tells the story, or whether I should be thinking more about laying out the figures in a way that creates the right light and dark pattern that serves the composition. And so my question to you is, how do you prioritize composition over narrative, or narrative over composition? I mean, how do you balance those things?
Okay. I mean, it's hard, right? I think there are like probably any number of ways that you could try to tackle the problem. But the way I think about it is kind of like this. It's really difficult to separate what is being said from how it's being said. Do you know what I'm saying? Does that make any sense?
I'm not
It's
sure.
so we like how you say something has a lot to do with what you're saying. If in other words,
I mean, I can
yes,
think
you
of it
can,
in terms of tone, when you're speaking verbally, your tone affects the meaning of what's
the
coming out of your
way that
mouth.
you interpret what's being said. Like if
Right.
I say something, if I said, um, if somebody were to say something, like somebody could say something that is actually meant to be ironic or the opposite of what they just said, right? And how do you know that? By the way that they said it.
Oh
Do you know
yeah,
what I'm
it could be
saying?
like, yeah, he's real good looking, or he's real good
But
looking.
you
Like there's two
exactly,
completely
yeah.
different meanings. Yeah.
Yeah, or you could say like, "Way to go, Sherlock," or you could be like, "Oh man, way to go, Sherlock." Like,
Yeah.
the way you say something has everything to do with the meaning of it or the way that people will interpret it. It's not that I think that you can't separate them in some ways, but it's really difficult to. So my first thought is not really like, how do I have an idea and then how to like, in other words, somehow I already know that these things have a lot to do with one another, right? And I feel like what my goal is more like, let me try to be a little more helpful. Sorry, I ramble a lot.
No, you're doing great.
So one of the things that I like to focus on is if something is supposed to be a story, right, or a narration, or maybe a narration story, then one of the most important things in telling a story is actually the plot of the story. Not so much describing all of the characters. It's describing the plot, right? That's what makes a good story, in my opinion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And plot consists in action, right? Like what happens, there's an action, it's done with an intention for an intended consequence, and there are consequences because of the action. Okay, like am I making sense?
Mm-hmm.
So that to me is what drives a plot. And so I'll go back to saying action, right? So when I first start, I've already got my idea in my head somehow. And what I'm looking for is an action or a gestural quality that I can hang all of the actions in the story along. So I'm almost going to consider it like my plot. So a lot of the way I start are these almost weirdly abstract gestural type compositions where what I'm looking for is an abstract arrangement that somehow gives an emotional pull to it, an emotional or a tone, as you said, a tone to the story that's in line with how I want the meaning to come off. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it would make more sense if we saw it. But so do you, when you say abstract, do you still have the forms of figures at least, or they just
No,
loose?
sometimes no, they're gestures. Think of it like a gesture drawing. If you did a gesture drawing and you did like a 1 minute gesture drawing, right? But you had
Yeah, but
not,
that's
not
still a
just a gesture.
figure.
No, yeah, but forget. So, okay,
Okay.
you're right. You're right. It is a figure. Let me back up then. I treat the entire composition as if it was a single thing. Like, in other words, all of those figures have one gesture that runs through all of them somehow.
Okay.
Just, all
Okay.
right. So I'm trying to make it where the action, all there's in the story you have the plot, right? You've got the plot. This is what the thing is about. Here's the plot twist, blah blah blah, whatever. And then you have, but to move the plot, this character does this, and then this person does that. Protagonist, antagonist, action, reaction. But the plot line is the gesture that guides all of those things together, right?
Yeah.
And so what I first do is I literally gesture out something that incorporates all of those actions together, almost like choreographed, like a dance or something. Like, how would you choreograph all of those movements together in a gesture that embodies the feeling of that plot line? That's kind of how I start.
Okay. So that's step one. And then,
That's step one.
and then at that point, let's say you settle on that gesture works. It's got the feeling that you want. Then do you start making decisions that will help to create a good composition that includes that gesture?
Yeah. I almost kind of do them at the same time.
Oh, you do. Okay.
So yeah, I mean, if I had to break it down, I mean, we're talking, it's like they're like these little abstract, gross little sketches. And so if I had to break it down, we're talking about like seconds right here, right? We're not
Yeah.
even like minutes or hours, like seconds. I'll move some kind of movement, some kind of rhythm in there, and then I almost within seconds already have put a box around it for a composition so that I can respond to it inside of a frame. Because I think that the gesture, like it's going to respond to the frame, and where you place it in the frame will make it feel different, right? So I'm doing that almost like in tandem. I start with the gesture mostly, but it's almost like in tandem, trying to figure out like how to get it to sit within a or sometimes the gesture suggests a certain frame around it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So, but my confusion is though that figures, the shape of figures is not what makes composition. It's the light and dark pattern. It's where you put the
Well, but
lights, where you put the
you could
shapes.
have you could have one with just pure line. There's composition in just pure line,
Right, but your
right?
ultimately your compositions are not just pure line. They are balances of light and dark shapes. Right. So
Yeah,
how
but
do you
that's too much to think. That's too much to think about at one time.
Okay, so that's where I'm
That's
going
too
with this.
hard.
So you're starting
Yeah,
to think of composition in terms of a linear approach first.
yeah,
But then at some
absolutely.
point you're going to have to incorporate light and shadow. So
Yes,
that comes second. That comes
yes, very
next.
much so. Very
Okay.
much so.
Okay.
So I would say that I do with the gesture thing, and then I start fleshing out like the various poses and how to hang those poses on those gesture lines so that all of the poses kind of move into one another in some way, right? I'm very influenced by Baroque and Renaissance work, like very much so. I really, really love Baroque and the Renaissance I mean, to me, they're just amazing, like amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And the way the fluidity of the figures all moving together is just it gets me every time. So, and
Yeah.
I really want that. So I'm looking at how these poses. So it's never just a pose where it's like this guy does this equals pose A. This guy does this equals pose B. These poses have to go together somehow, right? So
Yeah.
it's the original gesture that helps me tie the poses together in a way, you know?
Yeah. And you can definitely see that you're doing that. This is like I can follow a line through here. It's just beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, so I mean that's extremely intentional.
Yeah, same here. Look at that line. It's so dynamic.
Yeah,
Just
like
sweeping.
that one actually right there. If you imagine it like almost like a triangular wedge going from the woman with
Yeah.
the green hair
Boom
down to the
here.
guy and then back down to that's what I started with. I started with this weird triangular wedge, like pushing,
No
like bah,
kidding. Yeah, it's
yeah,
there.
yeah,
It's there. Okay. So, oh gosh. All right. So let's talk about your process a little bit. I want to go to Instagram now though for that because you do put some of your process here on Instagram, like these gorgeous
yeah.
sketches. Now these aren't the preliminaries. This is down the road in the process a little bit, right? These aren't concept
This is
sketches.
Yeah, this is at the point where I can't do this out of my head anymore. I need reference, whether it's models, mannequins, whatever. I need something to actually get down to the nitty gritty of like, okay, what is this really gonna look like? You know what I mean?
Right, right.
And and a lot of times, I don't always, but a lot of times I do these sorts of drawings um, like this. And one of the reasons why I do them separately, or especially in a lot of the big ones, is because, as much as I'm trying to make it sound like I've got this process and it's all clear and everything's thought out, like there are changes along the way, right? You realize certain things don't work. And so
Mm-hmm.
I've learned to kind of do them separately so that if you change one thing, you don't have to ruin you know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
they're easily swapped out if you change your mind, right? That's
Right.
why I do it that way, so that you have a little bit of wiggle room to develop things as you're going along, right? And if you
Right,
totally
right.
change your mind, you can do that on some level. And then, so this is right after the stage where at this stage, I've already figured out the linear arrangement of the composition. I've already figured out the tonal composition. That's already been done at this point. And now I'm like, we need to start moving this towards actual, what's going to get transferred to the actual canvas. You know what I mean? That's
Mm-hmm.
kind of at that point in the stage, at
Okay.
the drawing.
So I want to talk about that too. So you do these sketches, do you do them all from life, from mannequins, from photos, or all the above?
All of the above. And that for me is always, that's been a hard road. I wish I could do it all from life. I really do. It's just the cost is just prohibitive for me.
Yeah,
Like I
yeah.
just don't have that kind of money. So a lot of it is composited from various things, right? Like various
Mm-hmm.
sources and various things, and whether it's from photos or from whatever. But one of the things that I will stress is that even I want to stress the composite nature of it. Even that thing right there is not from one source material. It's like composited together in order to get the body language right that I want. Do you know what I mean? I found that
Yeah.
even with the best of models, they don't always get that pose exactly how it needs to be in order for it to fit in the larger context of the picture, to
Oh
make the
yeah.
flow
It's
of the
so hard to
lines right.
direct.
It's really
It's
hard.
so hard,
And
especially in a
it's
still pose. People don't like, it's easier, in my opinion, to direct someone to act in motion than it is to get them to act in a frozen pose.
completely, because it's completely unnatural.
Right.
And also any tiny little movement for them, it's a tiny little movement, but for you, from where you're, it changes like the angle of everything, and like,
Right.
and so I composite them. Almost everything that we've looked at, actually everything we've looked at, is composited somehow. Not one of those figures is like from a single reference of any kind. So
Wow.
yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah. So I mean,
Okay.
I'm really they're really driven in that sort of Renaissance Baroque way, where it's not about some 19th century idea about being true to nature or something like that. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with like, this needs to follow this design. The design is the most important element of the thing, and all of the elements have to contribute to the larger design, and that's the most important thing. In fact, it would be better, in my opinion, that it looks slightly cartoonish or slightly mannered and be in the right compositional spot than it look completely realistic. I think that's
Hmm.
actually more important. I mean, and those are my own priorities. Obviously, people can disagree with that in whatever way they want, but that's how I think of it.
Yeah. Well, it's your painting. No one's allowed to disagree with that.
Yeah,
You do
yeah,
what
right,
you want. Let them do what they want. Right.
right.
Yeah. And I can see that in your work because there is often, not always, but well, I shouldn't say often, occasionally sort of a caricature quality to some of the figures, but it's because they're doing things like with the blind man and the lame man where they just couldn't do. Like it's just there's no
Yeah,
way
yeah.
they could
There's
do
no
that.
way.
So it feels like almost like a caricature in a way. Sometimes,
Yeah.
not always, but also I think of Broadway when I look at your paintings because they're overacted. Like you're
Oh,
really
completely,
completely overacted. I mean, you're
completely.
you're really
This is actually,
pushing
that was really
pushing
funny.
these
Like,
facial
click on that.
expressions.
Wait, no, no. Go to but just to show you how much I change things. Like, if you go to the one below that, like
Okay.
the one below that, or yeah, that, I actually used myself as the model and just took all my hair off and made me bald, and like, do you know what I mean? Like,
Oh
so I just used
yeah.
myself. Yeah, and so I feel completely free to change things, and you know what I mean? Like, I literally use it as a model. It's a guide. It's not necessarily something to copy. It's something to work from, to conform to the idea or the story that you're trying to tell. So I, like, for this one, for instance, I just used myself as the model for that.
Right. So how do you
Yeah.
put all these drawings together into the larger composition? And then once you have them together, oh, I guess, well, here with this one, but this is one of your simpler compositions. This is the whole painting, right?
Yeah.
But I haven't
Yeah.
seen drawings for some of the more complex paintings.
Like
Um,
that one,
this one here.
that one of all of those guys. Yeah, like that one is, I did all of the drawings of the figures, I did all of the perspective, and I composited all of those drawings in Photoshop.
Okay. And then you
Right.
do what?
But
And then you grid it or something onto the canvas?
no, man, they have these great copy machines at FedEx Kinko's that architects use to enlarge architectural plans.
You're
So I just
kidding.
divide up in the Photoshop file. I just divide, like, the width of the paper roll is 36 inches by however long you want, and I just divide it up into like sections and print out these really long sections, and then just put charcoal or oil transfer on the back of it, and then and that way I don't have to grid it. I mean, you could grid it. It just takes longer. That's all. You
Right.
know.
Oh my gosh. I've never even heard of
You
that.
totally can.
No
Yeah, it works
kidding.
really well.
But
It
you're
works really
gridding
well.
your drawing. It's a drawing that you're gridding down there because you've already done all of the legwork and now you're just transferring your drawing
Yeah, essentially, and
or a
the
composited
and
drawing.
as I yeah, as I composite, and as I'm doing that, of course, I've already got the thumbnail sketches. I've already got all of, you know what I mean? Like all of that is there. So it's not like I don't know where they're supposed to go. It's like, you know, it's just a matter of like making sure the feet hit the ground properly and like all of that
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing. You know, like
Mm-hmm.
that sort of thing. Right.
Is this an example of one of your sketches from imagination here?
So yeah, that's a really, I mean, that's a typical example. That's actually when I was trying to figure out the tonal pattern, and that was like, I don't know why I picked that one, maybe because it looks more like the finest finished painting. But
Mm.
there was like any number of them. I actually did that for I was doing a class, a workshop in Rome, the Rome workshops that David Simon puts together, which are awesome, by the way. In fact, David was the model for the blind man and the lame man one.
Mm.
But if you go back out,
Mm-hmm.
I was giving a talk about composition. So the one that scratchy thing on the left, the left right there. So I was giving a talk about composition, and I was talking about like how various ways you could come up with compositions. And like I've already told you that I mostly start with the gesture, and I think of that, and that's mostly how I start. But the students didn't really know what an armature was, and so I was just showing them like, oh well, you could make it with, and I just drew this on the wall, which is why it's like it's just I just like I went like, well, I said here, I said this is what an armature looks like, and I was like, and you could sort of do, and I said I don't use these very much, but you could use them if you don't know, if you're having trouble organizing composition, it can be useful. I was like, they don't have any magical powers, I don't believe that or anything like that, but hey, you know, any port in a storm, if you can't think of something, like here's a trick, right? And I just drew out these, that was my initial little sketch where I was just drawing, and the idea just hit me like right then and there while I was drawing. I even stopped while lecturing while I was talking, and I just stared at it and I went, oh man, I got
No
an idea
way.
there. Yeah, completely. And then the other one I did like various tonal breakdowns. I think I did 3 different ones to show them what happens if you go for like a high key, a low key, or a middle
Mm-hmm.
key. And so I think that was just the one that I landed on. And so I think I put that there. I don't know why I put that up there, but that one was there. I did it literally just to show them, okay, so this is what I could do in order just to figure out a real simple, abstract, blocky mass, strip out all of the detail and just go for the large effect. And, you know, and
Okay.
anyway, so
Yeah, I
that's why
think
I,
I'm starting to get a sense for how you put these together. This is great. Okay, so then when you get to the painting stage, tell me about that. So you've got this big sketch that you've put together. You've composited all your individual figures into one big sketch. And
mhm.
then my assumption is, and correct me if I'm wrong, that once it's transferred, then what you do is use a combination of your large sketch and all of the detail references, say photo references and whatever else you have for the flesh tones, color, so on and so forth, while maintaining
Yeah,
the proportions of the larger sketch.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Like, so I keep the like the color study or the thumbnail or the early sketches out. I keep them out on another little separate easel by
Okay.
the painting constantly to constantly remind me of where I'm going. Because you know how it is when you get in the middle of all of it, you can easily lose your direction, right?
Totally.
So I keep the studies there to remind me of like where I'm going and how the color should work or where the focus of the picture is and all of that kind of a thing. So I always have that out no matter what. But then the other studies are more just for like when I'm doing a certain part, I bring out that and look at that if I need to. And but I'm always keeping it in context of the initial thumbnails and the initial studies to make sure that the details don't override the big picture of the thing. Like
Mm.
I'm really because I mean it's really really easy to get wrapped up on like painting a section, and then I mean I've done it, everybody's done it, and then by the end of the day you're like, oh, I painted it in the wrong key, it doesn't work for you know what I mean, like and it's because you just got zeroed in and you're having a good old time and you just forgot
Mm-hmm.
about the rest of the picture. So I
Yeah.
try to keep I try to keep that I even like to keep out the initial sketches because sometimes I feel that there could be like a raw emotional quality in it. you probably aren't going to find any on here because I don't really show them, but there could be like a raw emotional quality in it that I want to remember, that I don't want
Yeah.
to lose sight of. Do you know what I mean? It could be
Uh-huh.
even for that reason. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things you kind of touched on this where you mentioned that you can get zeroed in and make it the wrong key. But another thing that I have to really be disciplined about not doing is treating every portrait like a magic portrait. Like, getting into a face and just wanting it to be the best face I ever painted instead of wanting it to look right in its environment.
Right.
For example,
Yeah.
I might just be, oh, this would look great with this accent of color here and there. But if I do that, then it competes with something next to it. So I have to
Yeah.
like sacrifice that awesome move
Yeah.
in order to make it look better with the thing next to it. It's hard for me to do because I'm like, but it would look better if I put this little
Yeah.
splash
It's
of
a
color.
struggle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is
It's a
something
real
you struggle with too.
Absolutely. I mean, the reason why I have all of the studies and the sketches is because it helps keep me on track. It helps keep me because we're people. We get wrapped up in what we're doing and we're artists and like you want to play around with stuff but
Yeah.
you don't want the play and it's great if the play makes it better. If the playing around with it makes it better, but you don't want to force it into an entirely new direction all of the time, right? Or at least I don't. Like I do most of my playing and all of that, like radical change of direction early on in sketch. Like I said, I like to draw and I like to sketch, and I do all of like when I do that, I'm completely free to do whatever I want. I can change direction, I can go with any whim I have, like but by the time I've got this big painting and you've already spent like a couple of months, like you don't want to just like sink this thing all of a sudden. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Seriously.
The pressure's on a little bit more, and the sketches help keep me directed in the right way.
But it takes discipline. Yeah, it's easy to say, I don't want to sink this thing. But don't you ever get to a point where you're like, but what if this will make it better than I have it in the sketch? And then and you're not sure if
Yeah,
this is a good move or not. Have you ever had
yeah,
that
it's
come
hard.
up?
Well, I think that sometimes it could be a good move. you know
So,
Like, so I mean
yeah.
that's always the hot that's all, so here's the thing. I guess that's how I put it in perspective. One of the lessons that I learned, I think Jacob Collins told me this actually. I think Jacob told me this. He said that if you keep, I was told, like I said, I was told that if you keep changing directions midstream, you'll never really be able to truly assess how well your plan would have worked because you'll never see it come to completion, right? So
Yeah.
you'll never really know the strengths and weaknesses of that plan, right? And the only way to know that is just to commit to it. And at some point, you just can't look back anymore. It's like if you imagine the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, it's like you have to march out of Hades and you just have to trust the plan is behind you and that Eurydice is there the whole time. Because if you look back, right, you lose the whole thing, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and so I've just learned and the end result might not be as good as some other idea you might have had, but you'll never know until you get to the end. And so for me, I guess what keeps me on track is that the more that I do it, the more I can see things early on, and the better I get at exploring ideas and things early on. And I just have um, become better at realizing like, well, that sounds good, but that's not gonna really work if I, because you fail. So you know what I mean? There's
Mm-hmm.
failures, and
Mm-hmm.
but if you do it with intention and direction and all that, you can learn from the failure. If all you ever do is continually change course, you never really know what was the decision that actually led you to the successful thing. You sort of just got there by the whims of fate in a way, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and 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 while I think that can be extremely interesting, and it can be very, sometimes it's more interesting than sticking to the plan, and I can't deny that. But the danger in it is that in the long run, you wind up relying solely on fate instead of your ability to conceive of something and get better at the conception of it, that, because it's like a skill like anything else. There's a skill to drawing the figure, there's a skill to painting, there's a skill to designing, right? There's a skill to storytelling. So how you ever get it, you've got to get good at them in some way. And the only way to do it is to like, really try to see how it works. Like one of the things in this story is like, you finally go like, well, I've committed to this idea and I'm going to show it this way. And now in my mind, when I show it to people, I get to see how it lands, right? I get to see how people react to it. That's a learning lesson for me, because they don't always land exactly right,
Yeah.
and so over time you get better at anything else because it's a skill, like it's like a practice. And I feel that too much, I don't want to be so rigid that I don't allow any play to happen because that's no fun and that's not cool. But I don't think I would radically alter a direction when I'm too far down the line.
Right.
I'm not like a process painter, like one of those, like some people, that's exactly what some people do for sure. Right. And more power to them. Right. Because it takes a certain kind of courage and, just doggedness to do that. Right. Like you got to be fearless to do that. And that's admirable. I'm just for myself am trying to improve in my ability to show a narration and I find that if I can just sort of commit to my idea, I learn at a much faster rate.
Yeah.
Because I know I can assess where things went right and where they failed better because I don't have to go like, but then I changed ideas. Well, would it have worked? Oh, who knows? We just didn't go with that. Who knows if it would have worked or not, right? I want to know if it'll work or not, And I also console myself with saying, you can always do another version of the same thing. There's no reason why you have to do one version of a painting. You can do multiple versions.
That's a
of
good
painting.
point. Yeah. Yeah. So really have nothing to lose but time if you follow through.
Exactly. And if it's a cool enough idea, and you're really that into it, you'll do another one. Like there's that painting by, that painting by Ilya Repin of, I think it's called The Unexpected Return, I think is the title. It's got the guy, he's returned to his family. He's walked through the door and all of like the kids are like looking suspicious. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
That painting's incredible. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's more than one version of that painting. And the early version of that painting, I actually hate.
Really?
I hate
look that up again.
You should look it up and see the changes he made in the composition because he made that thing sing and he made it so powerful. And the early version of it, I would have just been like, whatever. You know what I mean? So he did a version of it and it was a completed painting and then did it again. And like somehow, you know what I mean? Somehow learned from the mistakes and said, no, let's do it a different way. And just knocked it out of the park, So there's no reason why you can't make more than one version of a painting. I don't see any reason why not.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good advice. Okay, so you had mentioned you take months on these paintings, and I'm going to ask you my pet peeve question. People always are like, how long does it take? Like that, why does that matter? But I'm going to ask you anyway, because I want to know, you have so many figures. Like, let me pull up one of your really complex ones. I think this is, no, that's not your most complex one. Your most complex one's probably down here. Yeah. This is one of them. Tell me about what kind of hours go into something like this. I know you can't know exactly.
I don't know. Let's say I'm a parent. I have a kid. So you got to do family stuff. I was also teaching during the time, so I basically can work Monday through Friday, except on teaching days, on teaching days, it's less, you can't work.
Yeah.
So Monday through Friday, weekends are devoted to family for sure. And so all I can say is that from beginning, from initial sketches to final painting probably took like a year or so.
Man, that is fast, I think.
Thank you, because I'm so self-conscious of that. I feel like I'm a really slow painter.
No freaking way. If you compare this to what we typically see from many, many painters, you've got portrait, a portrait, a portrait, a portrait, a portrait, a hand study, a still life, a still life, a still life. So you've got 1,000 paintings in here. You know, that's the
Yeah.
thing. Is you're not
Oh, you're
it's
making me feel good.
you
Thank
can't
you.
compare. Well, I'm a multi-figure painter, so I get the pain. You know, it's like it's there is you could make a living doing 1,000 paint or let's say 200 paintings in a year, or you could do this one, and it's the same amount of painting.
Yeah.
You know,
I feel that a lot of people are really, we live in a society where people are very impatient, want everything to happen, you know what I mean? Like right away, all the time. And and that kind of a thing. And it's not conducive to the mindset that it takes to do this kind of a thing. You
no,
know what I mean?
no,
Because people will go like, you'll get the eternal question, like, oh, what are you working on right now? What are you working on right now? And it'll be that thing like 6 months later, you're like, the same thing I
still the
was working
same
on.
thing. Yeah,
They're
same
like,
here.
look at you like, they're like, what are you doing?
I've
What,
taken
and
2.5 years on a painting like this before. I mean, it had 50 figures and it was all from life. That's what made it really
how
me
many?
kick 50. But that's what but that's what
Wow.
really kicked my butt. That was all from life. You know how it is. It takes way
Okay,
longer from life because of all the complexities, right?
sure.
But
And then the
two and a half
scheduling and
years, 2.5
yeah,
years. I
that's
wanted to
impressive.
shoot myself in the head after that.
Yeah, and it and it does, and it takes that kind of like perseverance where you just have to be able to persevere through it. Because there are those days where you're like, what am I doing with my life?
Mm-hmm.
And like, you go through the highs and the lows and the depressions, and they're much longer and more rough than if it's like a painting that's done in like a couple of weeks. Like this can go on and on and on and on, and where there are days where you're like, I just don't see the end of it. I don't
And it
know when
looks
the end.
bad for months at a time. And you go home
Yeah,
every night thinking you suck at painting
yeah.
for
And then somebody
months
says,
and months
And then
and
somebody says,
months.
so what are you working on? And you're like, oh.
Yeah. Oh, I'm
uh,
so glad to see that. Yeah, there's others out there that suffer that way a little bit.
the pain is real, man.
Yeah.
The
But
struggle
why?
is real.
So I want to know if you have the same perspective as I do on this. Why? Why do you put yourself through year-long paintings with all the suffering and the sacrifice that goes into it? What's the motivation? Or what's the win?
I don't know what the win is. Maybe there's not a win.
Really?
Um, I don't really know. I don't know what the win is. I feel like, well, on for one, I love that kind of work. I love seeing it. I love seeing when other people do it. Gets me going, right? I love it. I want to make work like that. Like, or I
Yeah.
look whether the people are like the living artists that have been doing it or artists in the past, like you see that and it's just like, man, that's incredible, right? Like, who doesn't want a world with
So it's the
incredible things?
accomplishment. It's like it's worth the sense of accomplishment of having done something difficult.
There's that. I would definitely think there's that. There's also this feeling of being in dialogue with that kind of history where you're not just passively taking it in, but you're also contributing to it. The kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing that you really love, like you're engaging in that practice. And through engaging in that practice, you're learning about yourself and you're learning about the world around you and you're learning about your thoughts and your ideas and how that interacts with other people's stuff. Like it's this really robust thing. Like you don't come out of making a giant painting having not learned anything. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's like
Mm-hmm.
and I guess maybe you get what you put into it too. Like the more you really shoot for the moon and try to give it your all and everything from idea to technique to everything, like the more you put in, the more you're going to get out of it. You're going to learn more about yourself, how you measure up to things. Like, and I don't know if you're probably like me, it's like, we all have our failures. And so those failures may be hard to bear, but they're also, if you look at it, it's like kind of a drive to be better, like,
Mm-hmm.
and not just, I mean, better for praise because we're social animals. We all want approval from others, but also because you want to be able to say things to the best of your ability. You want to flourish, you want to strive, and you want to become, not to be like some kind of army commercial, but you want to be all that you can be, you really want to do
Mm-hmm.
your best. Like, um, and I don't know, I can't help it. Like I said earlier, I just have a real deep love of Baroque art and Renaissance art and that kind of a thing. And I love them not in a way like they're dead and in the past, but they're still with us and they're still alive. Like to me, it's like a living thing. It's not gone. It's still there. And the only way that it continues is if you contribute to it, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to see more things like that. So I want to do it, you know, and it's like, and then you can also think of like how many little paintings have you done where you're like, oh, I'm going to make this painting. And then and you've got all these little paintings and they're nice, but they're not like there can come a time when you're like, when am I ever going to really say something I really want? Like there
Mm-hmm.
comes a moment when it's like, you're like, what has it all been for? If not to really dig into something you really want to accomplish, not because it commercially sells or because you will be successful at it or but because you want to try to make something come alive in some way, right? And like, I mean, who doesn't want that? I mean, I don't know, maybe somebody doesn't want that. I think most artists would have to say that that's part of what being an artist is to somehow push yourself in that way, like
Yeah.
to find out what you can do and to find out what you're about. Because honestly, like just as a for instance, I remember way back when I first was an art student, and I remember, you know, being exposed to like the work of Peter Paul Rubens, right? And I hated it. I
You
hated it.
did.
I
Really?
hated it. It was just so over the top and so cartoony, and I just couldn't handle it. You know, I was like, this is just like I just didn't like it, you know. I was just in Paris this summer too, and I just saw like that Maria Medici cycle. Oh my God, it's the most over the top thing in the
Oh, so
world.
you still don't like him, his work?
Well, no, hold on. I'm not. No, I do.
Oh, okay.
But as a project, that is one of the most vain cycles of paintings I've ever seen in my life. Right? All the same, at some point over time, by thinking about narrative and storytelling and gesture and design and and all this stuff, I came back to Rubens and going like, this is absolutely genius. Like, look at what this guy has done, right? And so like I had, you know, so going through this process of doing all of these things leads you into areas that you might not have really known about yourself. Like I started off thinking Rubens was horrible, and I now I'm like, I love it. Give me more
Isn't
of
that
it, you know?
crazy how that happens?
Yeah. So I also think that part of like diving into this stuff is going to be a process of you know growth and finding out kind of who you are and where your voice is, and it might not be what you wished it would be. Like you know, like I wish I had a different voice than I have. Like I kind of wish I could be more like so and so or whatever. Like I had more of this thing, you know, like maybe like they're a little too caricatured or whatever, I can be I'm self-conscious about that. But the fact of the matter is, it's kind of I feel natural. Like out of I can say over the course of my time doing this, I feel more like in my skin and more natural to what I'm doing than I've ever felt at any time in my life. Like you know what I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
if that means they're slightly caricatured, okay, so be it. Like I would rather be somebody else, but this is who I am, and that's
Oh, yeah,
like
we
you
all
know,
feel that way. We all feel
yeah.
that way. But can I just tell you again, you're a freaking genius painter. Just
Thank,
stay doing what you're doing.
thank you.
The caricaturistic how do you say that? The caricature quality of your figures is what makes one of the things, just one of the things that makes your painting so interesting, I think.
Thank you. Thank you.
But I get it, man.
That
We all
was
go there.
yeah. I mean, I don't know how else to do it. You know, so that's I guess why I dive into these things. You know, it's like it's fun.
Yeah.
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 And if you
Yeah.
can, and if you can get other people into it, hey, now we're really talking. You know, if other people, if you can really get other people to vibe, you know, to get into what you're doing, that's what I thought. That's what art. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that's what art was supposed to be about. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just don't see a lot of multi-figure work anymore, though. It's
That's because it takes 2.5 years to do,
I
Jeff.
know. Yeah, exactly.
Suffer for that.
Yep, yeah,
You're
it's
not going to
true.
get any Instagram likes. You're going to get like 5 Instagram likes, and they're going to be like, you know, you're right.
Oh man.
Looking at these things like on little digital files, it's like just does no justice at all to like what the experience of it is. You know, like think of it if all you ever did was see the raft of the Medusa on your computer screen, and you've never seen it in person.
I haven't seen it.
Okay, so the thing is gigantic.
Really?
I mean, it's overwhelming. It's truly, truly impressive, not just in terms of like the complexity and the brilliance of the idea, the sheer scale of it
Mm-hmm.
is like just overwhelming. It's truly impressive, and there's no
Yeah.
way you ever can get that feeling. There's not anybody who walks in there and looks at that thing and goes like, so what? There's nobody. Like
Yeah.
it's too crazy. It's too crazy, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So speaking of scale, what's the scale of this painting we're looking at?
That one it's around like 6 feet by 8 feet. I wish I
Wow.
could go even bigger than that, but I'm limited by studio size and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. Getting it in and out of doors, and I
I know.
suppose I
Isn't that
could.
frustrating?
Yeah, it is. Well, it's also like if I'm not making most of these um because they've been commissioned, so I have to just sort of go with whatever my limitations are because that's what I have. But I mean, maybe I would do them on commission basis. I totally would,
Yeah. Yeah.
Love to. But
Your figures, your standing figures might be 4 feet tall or something.
yeah, something like that. Maybe five at the
Yeah.
most,
So they're
or
still quite
maybe
large.
a little more than four. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. They're
yeah,
still
and
quite large.
yeah, and it's like I have to say it would be nice for them to be a little bit larger, but I can't fight the laws of physics, so
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
yeah,
I know what you mean because I want all my multi-figures. It's an addiction for me because I have a rule when I do a multi-figure, at least on the project I'm working on now, is the largest figure is life size or bigger. And then it works because obviously every figure can't be life size, right? Because
sure,
they recede. But the largest figure is life size or bigger. And in this case, yours would be one of these figures in the front. And then
yeah,
it dictates the size of the painting, right?
yeah,
But it always frustrates me that the figures in the background have to be smaller. I
yeah,
just want all the figures to be life size.
yeah. Well, if there was like that's a kind of an interesting thing, is I think a lot about is like a lot of times when people make paintings these days, um, especially I'm thinking of like teaching in university, the default setting for people is this sort of institutional idea that where you're going to see that paintings are in a gallery space or a museum maybe or something like that, where the walls are really big and the ceilings are really really high. But the fact of the matter is most art does not live in those
No,
institutional spaces, right? And so very few people have enormous 30-foot ceilings to put, like giant life-size paintings, and it's just like not very, it's just not a thing in society. And, that's just how it is. And
I know. It's so frustrating.
it
Be
is
so great if
frustrating.
there were
It
collectors with
is
giant
frustrating
walls.
because you know what but that's exactly what large work was made for. I feel like if you think about the more naive times of the past, which I think where they had the right idea was that they understood that large scale work was meant to be seen in a public venue, whether that be a church or a state, palace or a state a place, or I'm thinking of a Proudhon painting that was meant to go behind the judge's place in a courtroom. So like they understood that the scale of these things were appropriate for the public display of them,
Mm-hmm.
which also means
Mm-hmm.
the themes were also geared towards public themes because they were to be displayed in public. And if you look at things like those like the Dutch paintings where you have the Protestant Reformation, and they get rid of all of this stuff in the churches, and so the people that are buying it are sort of like this rising merchant class, and all the pictures get smaller,
Right.
right? Because why? Because they're going in the homes and stuff like that, right? So
Mm-hmm.
whereas something like the Night Watch by Rembrandt is still a very large picture because it was somehow meant to be displayed. I don't know actually off the top of my head where it was supposed to be displayed, if it was like in a guild hall or in a city. I don't know exactly what the original intention was, but it was painted large because the intention was that it would somehow go into a public venue. right? That's
Mm-hmm.
why it was that scale. And I think that a lot of times it's easy for us to divorce the fact that the scale has something to do with where it's going to go. And
Yeah. Oh, it's fact of life. You got to think about that.
yeah,
In fact, I think
so
that's probably that might be a greater reason for why you don't see a lot of multi-figure painting, because multi-figure painting requires a certain scale. It doesn't have to be
yeah,
life size, but it has to have a little more room.
yes,
And then, and I think of my own home, it's just the space between windows. It's just there's not that much
yeah,
space,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's the market we're in right now. It's private collector
It
market, not a
is.
public collector
But
market.
but also it's also good to think that a show, if you have a show somewhere,
Yeah.
that's a public event. And so big, large scale paintings, they're impressive. And like I said, that's a public event. And so like those large scale paintings can really make a show, just like it really, really make an audience just, they're like, wow, that was such a cool show. That was so
Mm-hmm.
cool.
Mm-hmm.
And just from the perspective of like the business end, that could be like a showpiece that helps drive sales of smaller pieces. You know what I
Right.
mean? Because maybe somebody can't have the big showpiece, but and in their mind they realize that one image is or whatever, it's not the kind of massive painting that these guys can do, but it's a piece of that, right? And it
Mm-hmm.
belongs to somehow, and that's really really cool. And that somebody could have that in their own house or whatever. I mean that's amazing, right? People that I have to say, people that buy original art to put in their house are amazing people.
I
That's
know,
like so
seriously.
cool that somebody could have the you know what I mean, have the income, and not only the income but the desire to have things like that in their home.
Mm-hmm.
Man, cool, very cool thing. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, you could spend all your money on the biggest boat, or you could buy paintings.
yeah, right.
There's a lot of rich people out there, but there's a certain portion of them that really appreciate the arts, and thank goodness.
Yeah, yeah. Thank goodness. Seriously, thank goodness.
Seriously. So, you had mentioned that sometimes these paintings can help you sell smaller work. Do you sell sketches from these
Yeah,
paintings?
I do. In fact, at the last show that I had at CoPro Gallery, with Sean Barber and Kaufman, I actually convinced the gallery owner to let me display the sketches, and we sold quite a few of them. Like
That's
all
amazing.
of the oil sketches for sure. So,
Hmm.
like yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah, that's
absolutely.
great. That's great.
It's
Well,
also given me a little bit more, encouragement to like take my time with the study and try to make a nice little study, like there's like like there's a reason to invest time in it, because it's not somebody might want it. If you make them really nice and beautiful little studies, they're cool to have.
and as a father, I imagine it takes a little bit of the guilt out of the prep work too.
It does.
Because you're
Yeah.
like, oh, well, I can actually put food on the table with this thing, so it's okay that I'm sitting here and laboring over just a sketch.
Yeah, exactly. There is a consolation to that, absolutely. And it does take the determination to where you're like, I could just start the big one now. You're like, no, no, make a nice one, do a good
Yep.
job. Like
Hmm.
put in that extra day of work or whatever it is to try a nice one, because, that's a cool thing. And it could, like I said, if they're a nice sketch, like there are people that love them,
Hmm.
like absolutely love them.
Okay, well, I don't want to keep you all day. I imagine you've got painting to do, so I got one final question for you, and that is, if you could give an aspiring artist one piece of advice, what would it be?
Oh man. Like students, or like
Just an
going out to,
aspiring artist. It could be an older artist, younger artist, a student,
okay.
hobbyist that wants to be a professional.
I would I would say that maybe that it's a long, complicated road, um, trying to make art, and especially display it publicly, and all of that. And there are so many things out there that can kind of lure you into a path, like whether it be appreciation or money or fame, whatever, that can make you go in certain directions. And all I can say is like, don't forget why you got into the game in the first place. You know what I mean? There's got to be a reason why, whether it was when you were a kid or teenager, whatever it might have been, whatever that time was when you didn't even think of like money. And don't forget like why you got into the game, and like really push for what you like, you know, that not, I don't want to call it a purity or an innocence, because I don't think holding on to, I don't think notions of purity are necessarily good, and like innocences can be naive, but I mean in a more you know, in a maybe more mature way, like to not forget like why you initially got into what you were doing, and like to kind of hold on to that and really try to make sure that you pursue that path, because that's where you're going to get all of your growth. That's where you're going to find the ideas that excite you. And consequently, if you're excited about them, other people will probably be excited about them, you know, like that kind of thing. So just sort of hang on to like where you initially, um, whatever your initial concept was of what you wanted to do, whatever that might be. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's kind of, I guess it's cliche advice, but that's what I would say.
Yeah, but I don't think so. I think it's good advice. And many artists have said similar things. And my personal opinion is there's no point in trying to chase the money or chase the fame, because you'll probably miss anyway. So you might as well be enjoying what you're doing.
Yeah. And at the very end of the day, if you make a painting and, you know, you're stuck with it for the rest of your life, at least you like the painting. You know?
That's true.
At least it's a cool painting. Like you
Yeah.
like having it. Like,
That's true. All right, man. Thanks, Carl. It was great having you on the podcast. I've been, as I said in the beginning, I'm a huge fan. So it's an honor to have talked to you for this couple of hours. I appreciate it.
well, thanks for having me, man. It's been a real pleasure talking to you too.
Thanks for tuning in to the Undraped Artist Podcast. If you enjoyed it, subscribe. And if you could, leave a comment or review. That really helps the channel. Please share the show with your friends. And if you're feeling generous, consider a monthly donation at theundrapedartist.com. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next week.